We arrived at Camp Serration in the late afternoon, the sun already beginning to hide behind the mountains, casting long and dark shadows over the land. In the car were me, Lucas, Clara, Rafa, and Joanna. Each of us brought something unique to the group. Lucas, the natural leader, always ready for an adventure. Clara, the most enthusiastic, with an easy and contagious laugh. Rafa, with his sarcastic humor and sharp intelligence. And Joanna, the most reserved, but with an observant gaze that seemed to take in everything around her. As soon as we got out of the car, we were struck by a feeling of isolation. The camp was vast, surrounded by a dense forest of pine trees stretching as far as the eye could see. The wooden cabins, old and poorly maintained, creaked in the wind. There was something unsettling about the place, a sense of abandonment and melancholy that clung to every structure. While we were unloading our stuff, we started hearing stories from the other campers about the camp. They talked about a recluse who lived in the mountains, a man who tragically lost his family and is said to still haunt the area seeking revenge. The legend was told with enthusiasm, like one of those stories meant to scare newcomers, but there was something in the storyteller's eyes that made me uneasy. As night fell, this sense of discomfort only grew. We could hear strange noises coming from the forest, footsteps that would come closer and then move away, as if someone or something was watching us. The shadows seemed to move on their own, casting distorted shapes on the walls of the cabins. On the first night, we were all a bit nervous, trying to laugh off the stories and sounds to push away the growing fear. But deep down, each of us felt that something was not right. There was a presence, a feeling that we were not alone in this isolated camp. And so, our stay at Camp Serration began, with a mix of youthful excitement and a silent fear that none of us wanted to admit. On the second night at Camp Serration, something terrible happened. We were all exhausted after a long day of activities and chilling stories, so we decided to go to bed early. Lucas, Clara, Rafa, Joanna, and I huddled in our cabins, trying to ignore the unsettling noises coming from the forest. I woke up in the middle of the night with a bad feeling, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I looked around and realized that Lucas's bed was empty. At first, I thought he might have gone to the bathroom or taken a walk, but something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. "Lucas?" I called out, my voice sounding louder in the oppressive silence of the night. No response. I quickly woke up the others. Clara, always the most optimistic, tried to calm everyone down. "He must be around, maybe he just went out to get some fresh air." But when we searched the entire camp and found no sign of Lucas, panic began to set in. Joanna was trembling, her face pale with fear. Rafa, usually sarcastic and laid back, was now serious, worry evident in his eyes. "This isn't normal," Rafa murmured. "He wouldn't just leave like this, not in the middle of the night." We decided to try calling for help, anyone who could assist us. Clara grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. We tried the camp's landline phones, but they were all dead. It was like we were completely cut off from the outside world. Fear began to spread among us. Clara started crying silently, while Joanna stared at the forest with pure terror in her eyes. I could feel my heart racing uncontrollably, a sense of despair taking over. We tried to stay together and stay calm, but every little noise outside made us all jump in fright. Lucas's disappearance, combined with our inability to contact anyone, made the situation even more terrifying. So the night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. We felt like something was watching, waiting. And deep down, each of us knew that Camp Serration was hiding something much darker than we could imagine. The third morning at Camp Serration began with a heavy sense of despair. Lucas's absence hung over us like a dark cloud. None of us could eat or speak properly, But we knew we couldn't just sit around waiting for something worse to happen. We needed to act. Rafa, Clara, and I decided to form a search team. Joanna was so frightened that she preferred to stay in the cabin, trembling at every sound from the forest. "We need to find him," Clara said, her voice firm despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Rafa and I agreed, determined to find out what had happened to our friend. We started our search around the camp, examining every corner and shadow. That's when we found the first sinister signs. Near one of the abandoned cabins, there were strange marks on the ground, as if something or someone had been dragged. Following the marks, we came to a spot where the ground was disturbed and there were torn pieces of clothing that we recognized as Lucas's. "This is a bad sign," I murmured, feeling a chill down my spine. Rafa agreed, his eyes fixed on the grim evidence before us. As we continued investigating, Clara found a trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. With no other option, we followed the tracks, each step increasing the tension we felt. The forest seemed to envelop us, every tree a silent witness to the hidden horrors. Finally, we came across a small cabin hidden among the trees. It looked abandoned, but something told us it was important. We entered and found a pile of old, dusty papers. Among them was a diary belonging to a man named Elias. The diary told the tragic story of Elias, a man who had lost his family in a fire at the camp many years ago. The pain and anger consumed him, turning him into a bitter recluse determined to exact revenge on the camp he believed was responsible for his loss. The diary's words were disturbing, full of anguish and hatred. "He believes we are to blame," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He thinks we deserve to pay for what happened." Rafa found a passage in the diary mentioning a series of kidnappings and deaths that Elias claimed as his personal revenge. "He's hunting us," Rafa said, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "And he won't stop until he gets what he wants." With these discoveries, our situation seemed even more desperate. We knew we needed to go back and tell Joanna what we had found, but we also knew that time was against us. Elias was out there, waiting. And now, with the diary in hand, we finally understood the full horror of what we were facing. We returned to the camp with our minds racing with fear and determination. We needed to find Lucas, learn more about Elias, and somehow survive the nightmare unfolding at Camp Serration. After discovering Elias's diary, we knew we couldn't waste any more time. With heavy hearts and fear clouding our minds, we returned to the camp to plan our next move. Joanna was even paler than before, but her determination to find Lucas and survive was undeniable. That night, we followed the clues from the diary that led us deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, and the darkness seemed to envelop everything, smothering any hope of salvation. After hours of searching, we found a cave hidden behind a curtain of vines and shrubs. Elias's hideout. We entered cautiously, our footsteps echoing off the damp cave walls. The air was cold, and there was a smell of decay that made us gag. In a dark corner, we saw a faint, weak light. We approached and, to our horror, found Lucas and other missing campers tied up and injured but alive. "Lucas!" Clara cried, rushing toward him. But before she could reach him, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. Elias was there, his face marked by suffering and madness. His eyes glowed with intense rage, fixed on us. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, holding a knife that reflected the dim light. "You're going to pay for what you've done." Rafa tried to negotiate, his voice trembling with fear. "Elias, we're not responsible for what happened to your family. We're just teenagers. Let us go." But Elias wasn't listening. His hatred was too deep, his mind twisted by pain. He advanced, the knife gleaming dangerously. I knew we had to confront him or we'd all die there. The confrontation was brutal. Rafa managed to temporarily disarm him, but Elias was strong, driven by insane fury. I fought with all my strength, each blow and movement fueled by the desperation to save my friends. Clara reached Lucas and began to untie him while Joanna freed the other campers. Elias managed to get the knife again and lunged at me. At the last moment, Rafa shoved him, making him fall. The knife slipped from his hand, and in a burst of pure adrenaline, I managed to grab it and hold him down. His eyes were still filled with hatred, but there was a silent plea behind that gaze. "We're not your enemies," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "This needs to end." As we held Elias down, Clara and Joanna finished freeing Lucas and the others. With everyone finally released, we began to exit the cave, taking Elias with us, still under our control. The tension was palpable, each step a battle against fear. When we finally emerged from the cave, dawn was beginning to light up the sky. We were exhausted, bruised, but alive. We contacted the authorities as soon as we returned to the camp. Elias was taken into custody, his tragic and horrifying story finally revealed to the world. Although we had survived, we knew we would never be the same. Camp Serration had left its mark on us, each of us carrying the scars from that encounter with terror. And even as we left, there was an unsettling feeling that some secrets of the camp might never be fully revealed. The final battle began when Elias managed to free himself from the makeshift restraints. We were on the verge of leaving the cave when we heard Joanna scream. Elias had freed himself and was advancing with blind rage, determined to kill us all. The terror I felt at that moment was indescribable. Rafa and I tried to contain him, but he was strong, driven by relentless fury. He attacked us with desperate violence, as if he were fighting not just against us but against the ghosts of his past. Every blow, every attempt to subdue him, seemed inadequate against his insane determination. Clara and Joanna ran around, trying to divert his attention and help free the campers who were still tied up. The chaos and fear were palpable. Amid the confusion, Rafa managed to grab the knife Elias had dropped earlier. With a cry of pure desperation, he lunged at Elias, trying to disarm him once and for all. That's when something unbelievable happened. During the struggle, a false wall in the cave collapsed, revealing a hidden old basement. Inside, we found remnants of documents, photos, and diaries that told an even more disturbing story. We discovered that the camp had been built on cursed land, a place of rituals and sacrifices dating back decades. Elias's family had been victims of these rituals, and his quest for revenge was rooted in a much larger tragedy than we had imagined. As the truth unfolded before us, the battle continued. We finally managed to subdue Elias, but not before he revealed that the spirits of his family and other camp victims still haunted the place, fueling the madness and terror he carried. With Elias subdued, our priority was to escape. We ran through the forest, each shadow and sound amplifying our fear. When we finally emerged at the camp, the sky was beginning to lighten. We contacted the authorities, who arrived quickly and took Elias into custody. The camp was shut down, and a thorough investigation began. As we left Camp Serration, we knew we would never be the same. Each of us carried the scars of that terrible night, the memories of the battles, the terror, and the disturbing revelations. Clara, Joanna, Rafa, Lucas, and I hugged each other, trying to find some comfort in each other's presence. Months have passed since the events at Camp Serration, but the terror of that night still haunts us. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night, hearing Elias's screams or feeling the presence of the spirits we discovered. Clara and Joanna struggled to return to normal life, and Rafa, though he tried to hide it, showed signs of persistent fear. We survived, but the experience changed us. The camp was demolished, but the dark secrets it held would never be completely forgotten. Sometimes, we felt that something or someone was still watching us, a subtle presence that never left us. We knew that Elias's story and Camp Serration were just one of many horror stories hidden in the world. And while we tried to move on, a part of us would always remain at that camp, forever marked by the horror we faced. The mystery and terror of Camp Serration persist, reminding us that true horror is not easily forgotten, and that sometimes, the worst nightmares are the ones we carry within us.